In this episode, we're going to talk about the case Europe was certain it would win, and the 3 empty chairs that lost it. Switzerland took this man off a plane, called him the boss of the biggest criminal organization in Russia, and held him for 778 days. Then Switzerland paid him 810,000 francs, not because he was proven innocent. Because of what never reached the courtroom, Switzerland locked a man in a cell for 778 days. Then Switzerland paid him 810,000 francs. Not a settlement, not a quiet apology, a court order, and the state had to pay it. The prosecutor had offered him 77,800 francs for each day inside. The court gave him more than 10 times that, roughly 1,000 francs a day, for every day he spent in a Geneva prison waiting for a trial the state lost. And the state lost that trial because of 3 empty spaces, not because of what the jury heard, because of what never arrived in the room. One of those empty spaces was a man who flew to Geneva to testify and was never allowed to speak because of one word he refused to say. 16th of October, 1996. Geneva-Cointrin Airport. Swiss police arrest a 40-year-old Russian who has just landed. He describes himself as a businessman. He runs a charity fund back in Moscow that gives to hospitals, orphanages, war widows. He is a master of sport in Greco-Roman wrestling. He grew up in a district on the southwestern edge of Moscow called Solntsevskaya. That district is why the Swiss are interested. Because to the police of at least 4 countries, the man from Solntsevskaya is not a businessman with a charity. He is Michas, the name investigators attach to the Solntsevskaya, the organization that the United States Senate would later call the most significant Russian criminal enterprise operating on American soil. He denies it. He has always denied it. He denies it today. Geneva does not care about the denial. Geneva has a law almost nobody outside Switzerland knows about. Article 260 of the Swiss Criminal Code, membership of a criminal organization. You do not have to prove a murder. You do not have to prove a theft. You have to prove that the organization exists and that this man belongs to it. It sounds easier than proving a crime. It is not. It is harder. Because an organization is not a body on a floor. An organization is paper and witnesses and other people's countries. He is taken to Champ-Dollon, the remand prison outside Geneva. Concrete wall, wire, a bus stop on the road outside with the prison's name on the sign. He will be behind that wall for 2 years and 48 days before a jury hears a word of evidence. The investigating judge, Latom, names him as Judge Zakin, questions him for close to 200 hours. 200 hours of questions. And at the end of it, the strongest charge on the file quietly disappears. When he was arrested, the accusation was money laundering. That is the charge that makes headlines, and it is the charge that needs bank records. The bank records were in Russia.
Voice of America reported it in a single flat sentence at the end of November 1998. Swiss investigators found it impossible to gather evidence in Russia. So the money laundering count was dropped before the trial even opened.
What was left? Belonging to that organization, forgery, and breaking the Swiss law that restricts foreigners buying property. Maximum, if everything landed, 7.5 years. 30th of November, 1998. The courthouse in Geneva is sealed off. Police around the building. He arrives from Champ-Dollon in an armored Mercedes, wearing a bulletproof vest. The witnesses get vests too. 90 of them are called, speaking 6 languages. Some testify from behind screens. For one key witness, Geneva does something it has never done in that building before. It brings in a video link so the man can give evidence without being in the room. Think about what that tells you. A court in one of the safest cities in Europe is behaving like a war zone because of who might be listening. The prosecution's case is built like a wall, brick by brick. A former Moscow police officer who has been granted political asylum in Switzerland. Businessmen who say they paid. Foreign investigators. Documents that trace companies. recordings from police intercepts. And then, one by one, the bricks come out. The judge, according to Letton, declines to put every intercept in the file, keeping only the recordings he considers relevant. Witnesses who were supposed to establish guilt turn out to contradict each other and to contradict themselves. One witness comes to say that another witness is unreliable, a man with his own police problems. 15 days of this. 15 days of Europe's strongest case against the Russian mafia, being carried into a courtroom under armed guard, and slowly turning into an argument about whether anyone in the room can be believed. Meanwhile, in 3 different places, 3 things that were supposed to be in that courtroom were already gone. The first empty space is a man in a bed in a Dutch village, Oischat, North Brabant. 28th of July, 1997, 16 months before the trial opens. A 34-year-old Russian businessman named Vadim Rosenbaum is shot dead in his own home, in his bed in a large house in a quiet Dutch town. Dutch homicide records list him that year among the country's killings. He had reported threats before it happened. He was, by those accounts, a police informant on the Russian mafia. He was also a name on the Swiss list, a witness the prosecution had counted on. He never reached Geneva. His killing has never produced a conviction. The second empty space is a folder that stayed in Moscow. Switzerland asked Russia for legal assistance. Files, records, the paperwork that would show the organization existed and that this man ran it. Geneva's chief prosecutor at the time, Bernard Bertosa, put it carefully years later.
The Russian judicial authorities, he said, did more than drag their feet. He was fair enough to add that it was not a total silence. One Geneva request did come back, and came back with results.
But Letton reported something sharper than any diplomatic phrasing.
A criminal file involving Mikhailov sitting in the safes of a Moscow court. Existing. Not traveling.
You cannot cross-examine a folder that is in another country. You cannot show a jury a document that was never sent. The third empty space is the one that decides everything. The prosecution had a witness who had already said the words out loud. A former bodyguard, Austrian, according to Letton.
A man who had once boasted that Mikhailov was the true boss.
By 1998, that man is not a bodyguard anymore. He lives in North America. He teaches sport. And he lives under a different identity because of what he had said. He does not hide from the trial. He gets on a plane. He comes to Geneva. He is willing to testify with his face covered. The court is ready for that. The screens are there. The video link is there. But the court needs one thing first. The presiding judge asks him to state his name, his new name, the one he lives under now, not to the public, not to the press, to the judge. He refuses. And the judge refuses to hear him. The one witness who had named him flew across an ocean to say it under oath, stood in the building, and never testified. Because the price of testifying was the name he was using to stay alive. That is the detail. Not a gun, not a document. A name that was never spoken in a courtroom. 11th of December, 1998. The jury of the Geneva Criminal Court acquits him of the main charge, membership of a criminal organization. After 2 years and 2 months in a cell, he walks out of the building a free man. The jury does not just say no, it writes 15 pages explaining why.
Letton summarized what those pages said. The witness testimony was inconsistent, and there was no concrete material evidence that could establish his participation in a criminal organization. And then, the jurors added something that is unusual for a jury to put in writing at all: their astonishment at how the investigation had been conducted and at the circumstances of the arrest.
Read that twice. The jury was not only unconvinced by the case, the jury was surprised by it. Outside the courthouse, 2 of his 4 lawyers, Pascal Moore and Alec Raymond, speak to reporters.
Their client, they say, spent 2 years in jail for nothing and is now free to do whatever he wants. They were proud to see the law of procedure applied here in Geneva very strictly, despite quite a huge media influence, and the jury had worked precisely, strictly, and according to the law.
The system worked, they were saying. That is exactly what the state was about to pay for. He goes home to Moscow, and then he sends Geneva the bill. 24th of July, 2000. The Geneva Court of Justice orders the canton to pay him 800,000 francs, 600,000 for lost earnings, 200,000 for moral damages. The full amount he had asked for. The prosecution had argued for 77,800. Geneva appeals to the federal court in Lausanne. On the 19th of October, 2000, the federal court throws the appeal out, not on the merits, but on standing.
A public authority cannot bring this kind of appeal unless its own autonomy is at stake.
The canton pays 800,000 plus 10,000 in costs, plus a 2,000 franc court fee for losing.
In the section on Russian organized crime, prosecutors describe a New York indictment and identify one figure, in passing, as a close associate of the Solntsevskaya leader Sergei Mikhailov.
A Swiss jury had found there was no evidence he belonged to a criminal organization. An American Senate document, printed and public, calls him its leader. Both of those are real. Both are on paper. They do not agree, and neither of them is going to be withdrawn. He kept building the other life, the charity fund, church decorations, about 24 of them, a book with his own 2 names on the cover, Mikhailov or Mikas, and a photograph of him holding it, looking at the camera. Years later, he goes to court again in Russia, using the right to be forgotten law, asking search engines to unlink the old stories, which is its own kind of ending. A man acquitted for lack of evidence, spending the next 20 years arguing with the internet's memory. The Swiss trial is still, on paper, one of the biggest attempts any European state ever made against Russian organized crime. It failed on 3 empty spaces: a witness in a Dutch bed, a folder in a Moscow safe, and a man who wouldn't say his own name. The first one was killed. The second never moved. The third one was standing in the building. Which of those 3 would have changed the verdict? Nobody knows. Only one of them was in the room, and the room turned him.